This episode contains mature themes and content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Friction to Freedom podcast, where the mission is to support you as you tap into the best and highest expression of yourself. My name is Janet D. Thomas, and I am delighted that you're here joining me today. This podcast really has to do with the idea of inner shifts can lead to external success. So we're going from the inside out rather from the outside in, relying on things externally, money, shopping, food, sex, relationships, in order to help us feel better about ourselves. What I am proposing is that it is an inside job, and the way that we can level up our lives in whatever way is the best and highest expression of ourselves has to do with the inside work. You might want to think about this as a game of golf. It really is kind of about our personal best and achieving with respect to being accountable to ourselves for our own performance rather than relying on other things or other people to reflect to us how good we may be. So this really is an inner job. So inner shifts can lead to external success. So, with everything that I share here, please remember you are your own highest and best authority. So, take what you can use and leave the rest behind. So, this time, what we're going to talk about has to do with the inner critic, that pesky inner critic. Sometimes it can be incessant, sometimes it could just be in the background or some other kind of way that you have a relationship with your inner critic. And I will share with you that this has been one of my lifelong quests to understand how to get rid of my inner critic. Or actually, what I've come to understand is that it's about transforming the inner critic. So, we're going to talk about that. But first, what we're going to talk about is a little bit of information about the nervous system when it comes to how to view or frame these types of conversations. We're going to look at things that can be very challenging, but at the same time, we want to have a backdrop of science underneath it in order to support what it is we're looking to observe, transform, you know, kind of reassess. So, want to start off with the conversation about the inner critic with a little bit of neuroscience. So, last time, the time before, we talked about anxiety. We talked about how the limbic center, which is in the midbrain here, is where the neurotransmitters relate to the body when it's time to fight or flee, and all of the systems within your body that need to kind of get into gear in order to help you survive. So, this is when we have an actual physical threat. Okay. It also kicks in when we have a perceived threat, which really has to do with our own thinking. So, the nervous system orients to four different states: freeze, fight, flee, and homeostasis. Talked about this before. We're going to talk about it much more. But again, as a foundation for this particular discussion, we talked about the midbrain last time with anxiety and how to calm that down when there's no physical threat. And this time, what we're going to add in is a little bit more of the front of the front of the brain here, which is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is where homeostasis lives. That's where rest and digest. That's when, as an example, if you're an animal in the wild and you're hungry and you have to go out and eat, once you're done eating and your muscles are loosened up again, you're relaxed, it's a rest and digest state. So the rest and digest state lives in the front brain, which is called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is also the center where the imagination lives, where executive planning is, where critical thinking lives. It is the social brain that connects with other human beings. It's also where your empathy is and your compassion. And that's where it lives, in the front of the brain. Okay. Now, if you are imagining a life that you want to step into, preferred situations that you want to have in your life, when you imagine those things, that's a front brain mechanism that's happening. You are activating your front brain. So, this is a very important part of the nervous system. So, I invite you to consider this: the front brain, your imagination, your future planning, your executive center, when you're in rest and digest, is where the body is actually in home base. That's when it's feeling the best. There's no physical threat, everything's kind of chill. So you get to consider and ponder other things. Here's what's interesting about these two things when you're talking about the midbrain and the front brain. The midbrain and the front brain kind of act as a seesaw with each other. As an example, when you are in your midbrain, when you are in a stressed state, when your body is dysregulated, it is seeking to protect itself, fight or flee. When your brain is in rest and digest, that's a different area of the brain, the front brain. So these are kind of, I won't say opposite to each other, but they work in tandem. Like when you're in your midbrain and you need to jump out of the way of a speeding car, you don't want to be in your imagination. You don't want to be learning something new or looking at something curious when you got to get out of the way. So they are both as important to your ability to survive, but they kind of are a seesaw where one is up, the other's down. One is activated, the other is quiet. So once you recognize, and as we talked about before, the midbrain loves predictability and comfort. It likes no surprises whatsoever. And that's what keeps you physically safe. Okay. On the other hand, your front brain thrives on novelty and curiosity and unpredictability. It likes new things. It likes new ideas. It loves to consider different things. So that is interesting because it's actually kind of opposite to what the midbrain likes. So in order to activate your prefrontal cortex, first of all, you got to be safe. Your body has to feel comfort and predictability, that there are no surprises. It's not going to need to fight or flee or freeze. When that happens, once you are comfortable in your physical surroundings where there's no physical threat, that's when you can activate your prefrontal cortex. And the way that you can do that is to think of very silly things, think of very creative, novel ideas. Like, as an example, if you could taste the wind, what might that taste like? That's an example. Doesn't make sense, right? But the prefrontal cortex, your executive center, your novelty and your curiosity thrives on ideas like that. Here's another one. What would the color of a rainbow taste like? And you could pick any color. What might that taste like? I'm sure you can think of your own silly ideas that don't make sense. It actually activates your front brain. So the sillier, the more novel, the more curious something is, activates that center. And here's one other thing I want to share about why I wanted to give you this foundation today first, before we talk about the inner critic. Because the invitation here first is to always make sure that your physical body is safe. That's always the first order of business when it comes to survival. When you are feeling anchored in, when you recognize that you've got all of your immediate needs met, that your heart is beating, that your organs are automatically functioning, that you are breathing, that you could feel the earth underneath your feet, when you recognize that you have access to food and water, things like that, that calm down your midbrain, then you can activate your front brain with novel, crazy, new concepts. And what that's going to do is that's going to settle down your nervous system. I wanted to share this information before we get to the discussion about the inner critic, because the invitation is for you to consider becoming an observer and becoming curious and exploring new ideas. I wanted to share this little bit of light because sometimes when we talk about the inner critic, or more than just sometimes, it can feel very heavy and dark and really kind of intimidating to get into. I mean, after all, at least in my experience, I have avoided it so much in my life. Not just avoided it, but ran from it, trying to silence it. But the more I tried to silence it, it got louder and louder and louder. So, within the context of novelty and curiosity, we're going to look at it with an observer's touch as opposed to feeling debilitated by it. So that's a little bit of how we're going to start the foundation as we shed some light on the inner critic. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to share has to do with my own lived experience. And this is my relationship with my own inner critic. And it's been a lifelong one. Um, Non-preferred experiences as a little girl, I put two and two together where I was the one who was wrong and bad. And these are adults that betrayed my trust. But as a little girl, I couldn't make sense out of why that would happen. And so I blamed myself. So I decided that I was wrong. And because I was wrong and I was bad, and my habitual thought was that I was no good, as a result of those non preferred experiences, I became very self punishing, punishing myself for years and years over things that I could not control. But that was the repeated thought. So I was keeping secrets, I wasn't sharing it. And as I was not sharing it, it kept getting bigger and bigger inside of me. And that inner critic, that critical voice, lived inside of my belly and was loud and menacing for decades. And I was running as fast as I could. I was overachieving as best as I could to try to quiet that inner critic, and it was not working. And it almost took me out. And I talk about that story. There's a YouTube video where I talk about it. I also share the story on my website a bit. But my inner critic almost took me out. And I had to, my non negotiable goal was to get a handle on this in order for me to continue living a life, any life, my life. I was ready to give it up because I couldn't get rid of this loud, menacing inner critic. So I've learned a couple of things about it that I'd love to share with you today, only as an introduction, because we're going to be talking about this a lot. This is going to be something that we're going to continue to delve into. But I wanted to make sure that we started with a foundation within our nervous system of understanding that our imagination, that observing, that being curious is very, very important for our lives and for our balance in our body. So the invitation is to dream, to imagine, to be curious, to explore. That's what is really invigorating and empowering to the system. So, to cut to the chase when it comes to your inner critic, I want to share 3 points, but they're all around the idea of don't believe everything that you think. You don't have to believe it. It's going on, but you don't have to believe it. Okay. First point about the inner critic that I invite you to consider. Just an invitation to consider. Remember, you're your own highest authority. So, the first thought about the inner critic is critical. It's got a critical voice. Think about it this way. Think about if you know of a movie critic. If you think about a movie critic, their job is to be critical. If they, as an example, if they love every movie that they see, you may not want to read about what they're critiquing, because it's like, oh, they're just going to like it. They're not even going to have anything interesting to say about it. A movie critic's job is to be critical. So think about it this way. Your inner critic's voice is critical. That's the language that it knows. Okay. But I invite you to consider this. If your inner critic only knows the language of being critical, I invite you to think about the idea that there is a positive wish underneath the criticism, that there is a positive wish underneath the criticism that your inner critic is sharing with you. I'll give you an example or two. Let's say that your life partner, let's say you've been working a lot and you come home and your partner, as soon as you walk in the door, your partner starts complaining, right? Being critical. You're never here. You're always gone. What's going on? It feels like it's critical. But if you think about it, if that's the language that they know, if critical talk is something that you're raised with, chances are you're going to repeat that in your life because that's what you're used to. So let's say that somebody's traditionally pretty critical. What if there was a positive wish underneath the criticism that you can translate it to? So, as an example, the critical voice about you're never home, the positive wish under that could be, I miss you. I want to spend time with you, and you're not home. That could be one of the positive wishes underneath the critical voice. Don't believe everything you think. There's a positive wish under there. Let me give you another example. Let's say that you're home, you're in school, your mother, your father, your guardian, your parent, somebody is on you about your studies. You didn't do this right. You didn't do that right. Did you take care of this? You didn't take care of that. It feels like it's always critical, critical, critical. The positive wish under that is, I really want you to be able to take care of your life. I really want you to succeed. I see it that you would succeed better if you were taking care of your schedule better, if you were studying for tests better, if you were doing the whole point underneath it is a positive wish for you. I want you to succeed. So think of it as when you are hearing your inner critic just going on and on and on and berating you, you're no good, you don't do anything right. What's the positive wish under there? So I invite you to just consider that within the context of don't believe everything that you think. It could be an illusion, but to dig a little deeper, observing with curiosity what that might be. Okay, inner critic is beating my ass up right now. What's the positive wish underneath the criticism that it doesn't know how to say because the only language it knows is to be critical? So that's one point to consider. Okay, just one idea. The second idea is this. So imagine that, okay, your inner critic is not the only voice in your head. There are a lot of other voices. I haven't seen that movie or two of the movies called Inside Out. I haven't seen any of those movies, but I think that the premise of that is where someone is really looking at their inner voices and what's happening in there. So, what I'm saying to you is, what I'm suggesting, what I invite you to consider is that, let's say that your mind is like, let's call it a bus, okay? Your mind is like a bus, and you have passengers on the bus that come in and out. They come on the bus for a little ride down the street, then they stop at their exit, they get off of the bus, and then other folks come onto the bus. Well, think of all of your inner voices like these passengers on the bus, and they come and go. They come and go. They never stay there all the time. So my suggestion is to allow them to come and go. They're what you have, these different voices inside, including the inner critic. They're what you have. They aren't who you are. They're things that you have, and they're always shifting and changing. So if they're always shifting and changing, you don't have to believe everything that you think. You don't have to. Another analogy is with a car. Imagine that you are a car. You're driving the car. You're in the driver's seat of the car, and your hands are on the steering wheel, and you're driving the car. Think about your inner voices like 6-year-olds in the back seat talking. They're just jabbing away, talking about different things. And you're driving the car. They're what you have. These voices are what you have. They aren't who you are. This inner critic's voice is but one voice within a lot of other voices that are inside of you. It may get front and center stage because you could be so used to it berating you all the time and habitually just running through the same tapes in your head about you not being any good or you not being worth anything, blah, blah, blah. It's still going and going, but you have other voices as well. That one just may be taking up all of the energy and being very, very loud. But once you observe it and allow it its voice without judgment and just observing it, you can just maybe get a handle on it not being so foreboding or running away from it so much. It's talking just like all the other 6-year-olds. And of course, with all due respect to 6-year-olds, they're magnificent. I would suggest that your inner voices are magnificent too, but they're there. Some of us hear them louder than others. Some don't hear them at all, and they would think, well, I'm just nuts. I don't argue with that. Can't argue with that. But I hear them, and I hear them quite often. And the inner critic happened to be the loudest for so long while I was trying to run from it. But as I started to understand about it, as I started to shed light on it, it started to transform because I was allowing it to be without being afraid of it. I stopped being afraid of it. So, point number 2, your thoughts come and go like passengers in and out of a bus. Your inner critic is but one voice as a 6-year-old in the backseat of your car as you're driving, and they're just chattering along. So I want you to consider that. The third point I wanted to make when it comes down to the idea of don't believe everything that you think. Think about it this way. When you are observing your thoughts, when you are observing your inner critic, think about it this way. When your inner critic is scaring you or whatever you're feeling about it, go back to your nervous system. Ask yourself, am I under any physical threat right now? Is there potential harm to my body that's going to happen at this moment because of what you're thinking, what you're hearing in your critical thoughts? Is there an actual physical threat? And if the answer is no, then don't believe everything that you think, because you're actually comfortable. Your body is actually physically safe. It's in your mind that this is happening. Here is a bonus idea that I want to share with you. Okay. Another thing to just consider when it comes to this initial conversation about the inner critic. The inner critic is one of many voices, as I mentioned. The inner critic is loudest because it's being avoided. Think about it this way. When your mind is in idle, like a car is idling, when you aren't giving yourself some instructions to do something, when you're not focusing on something, let's say you're not studying, you're not reading, you're not taking a walk, you're just chilling out, like you're just hanging out, and your mind doesn't have a task that you are giving it at the moment. When you don't have a task that you're giving to your mind, it's just waiting for instructions. So as it's waiting, it's idling, just like a car would idle before you put a car into gear and to navigate moving somewhere. It's idling, it's waiting for instructions. So consider that when your mind is idle, the recurring thoughts they're just gonna be running. This tape is gonna be running in your head of all these different things that you're thinking about, and it's all no problem because it's just waiting for instructions from you on something that you're gonna do. So that's a little bit of bonus information about don't believe everything that you think. Again, if your mind is just idling, you can go to critical thoughts. You're going to think about things that you may not have done well. You may think about things, what you're going to have for dinner or what's happening and what you may do tomorrow. Just idling because there's no instructions on you're focusing on something. When you're focusing on something, it gives your mind a perspective or a point of view to get into action on. So while your mind is idling, understand that you're going to have a lot of different passengers on and off the bus. And they're just chattering away because that's what the mind does. The mind likes to have thoughts. And it's okay that you have them. You just don't have to believe everything that you think. I hope that some of this has been helpful to remember that a lot of times it's just chatter, and don't believe everything that you think. Consider your thoughts like clouds in the sky. You are like the sky, a clear blue sky. And thoughts are like clouds in the sky, and clouds are always moving and changing. They're always shifting in and out. They never stay stuck, and neither do your thoughts, and neither does your inner critic. So, what I'm suggesting is that when your critical thoughts are happening, again, see if there's a positive wish underneath. Remember that it's just one of other voices that you can also give rise to. You've got an inner nurturer, you've got an inner comic, you've got, all these different facets to yourself, all these different aspects. It's just that the inner critic can be the loudest because it's the one that gets a lot of the attention. But you don't have to believe everything that you think. Okay? When you are giving yourself tasks, you're doing stuff, it's silent for a while because you're focused on something. And that's pretty darn good. What we're doing here is shedding light on things so that things don't stay as stuck or as let's say as mysterious. We're demystifying things here so that you can start to feel much more empowered when it comes to your life and living the life that you want to live. And it goes back to inner and internal shifts can create external success. Next time, we're going to talk about lemons. And lemons are a metaphor, lemons and lemonade. It's actually a metaphor for the lemons are non-preferred experiences that I call non-preferred experiences, those things that compromise mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Non-preferred experiences are those things that compromise our well-being in some way. The next discussion that we're going to have is how to take those non-preferred experiences exactly as they are and turn them into the very building blocks for your self-empowerment. I invite you to consider that there are no interruptions in your path, that everything is part of your path. We simply need to figure out how it serves us. And that's what these future discussions are going to be about when it comes to converting lemons into lemonade. My name is Janet Thomas. I am so excited that you joined me today. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas that you want to share, please hit me up on social media, on my website, or through email. And in the meantime, this week, take really good care of yourself. Remember to calm down your body, breathe when you're feeling upset and dysregulated and there's no physical threat. And open up your imagination. Give yourself permission to dream, imagine, be curious, and grow. And then that's how we can transform our external reality from the inside out. Thanks again.